This is Frankfort, Kentucky. It is far from the international sites that I typically feature, but I'm back in the States for a few weeks. This stop, however, is very special for me because this is where I grew up. It has been so much fun visiting all of the key locations here and preparing to share what makes Frankfort unique. I think you'll be surprised. This place has everything from bourbon to fried bologna sandwiches. Just for a moment, I am old, alone, and back at home. Frankfort is a major location in the now wildly popular bourbon industry. There are numerous distilleries in the area, but the biggest player here is most probably Buffalo Trace. This was the scene on a recent Sunday morning as people lined up to gain access to the grounds. Some were on hand for tours, and others were simply present to buy bottles of what is produced here. The offerings in the visitor center change from day to day, and many times the featured brands sell out quickly. There are a dozen or more individual brands that are distilled and aged by Buffalo Trace. They are some of the most prestigious names in the industry. This is billed as America's oldest continuously operated distillery. Some form of bourbon production has existed here for over 200 years. Walking the grounds allows you to get a sense of the history at this location. A variety of complimentary tours are offered to give visitors a look at production and to let them see inside many of the buildings. Of course, if you can land a tour, that is going to be great. But if you can't snag one, come out here anyway. You can wander the grounds, see a lot. Plus, in the visitor center, the tastings are free. Even without taking a tour, there are opportunities to see inside a warehouse and some of the barrels of bourbon that are being aged. You can also view the 8 millionth barrel that was filled here since Prohibition. In a sign of how production has escalated, it came just 4 years after the 7th million barrel was filled. The visitor center is a special place too. There is plenty to buy, and this is where some of the products can be sampled. I tasted Traveler Whiskey. Buffalo Trace now attracts somewhere in the neighborhood of 350,000 visitors each year. Another of the distilleries in Frankfort is Castle & Key. There is history here, as the distillery and castle was built in 1887. It operated for decades until it was shuttered in 1920, a victim of Prohibition. There were various owners over time, but for almost 100 years, no bourbon was produced here. The most astonishing feature about this place is how new it is. The old Taylor distillery was here for years, but then it was down and out, and this place was abandoned. Castle & Key came in and opened up in 2018. Their first bourbon emerged on the scene in 2022. Today, the grounds are astonishingly beautiful. The water of Glens Creek flows through the property. The centerpiece is the spring house. This historic structure dates back to the early days and provides a place to sit and relax. It is also the spot where tours of the property began. There are a couple of different opportunities to go in depth and see much more of the operation. This is the boiler room, which served as the power generating station long ago. Now, it is a remarkably attractive guest center and retail space. While the space has a modern aesthetic, it also still holds reminders of the past. In Taylorton Station, there is a walk-up bar where the liquor that is produced here can be purchased by the drink. It's a part of the experience that should not be missed. This is a half ounce and it's from 2023. $4 for this pour. I'm not a big bourbon drinker, but man, this is really good. At this point, Castle & Key has several variations of its bourbon whiskey, in addition to a few other spirits. Frankfort is the capital of the state of Kentucky. This building, which serves as the center of government, was dedicated in 1910 after having been built at a cost of $1.1 million. Over $600,000 was spent for furnishings, a power plant, and landscaping. As you can see when I stopped by this time, the iconic dome was surrounded by scaffolding. The building has been on the National Register of Historic Places since 1973. It was cool as a kid, seeing such a magnificent structure sitting on the hill at one end of town. Likewise, the landscaping was always impressive. Something is almost always blooming in the beds that form the lead-up to the Capitol building. They add color and beauty to the overall environment. The same group that designed the landscaping worked on projects at the White House, the nation's capital, Acadia National Park, and Yosemite Valley. To the side of the property is the governor's mansion. It has been home to the state's chief executive since 1914. Its grounds are also pretty spectacular. There is an especially unique feature to the rear of the Capitol. This is the Floral Clock. It was put in place in 1961. The face of the clock has a diameter of 34 feet. There are somewhere close to 10,000 flowers growing in the planter. The color and appearance will change at various points through the year. Each of the clock hands weighs more than 500 pounds. It is quite a special attraction that is always worth stopping by to see. Frankfurt actually has two Capitol buildings. This was the predecessor of the facility currently in use. It was utilized for 80 years before there was a need for a bigger and better structure. Now the building serves as a museum, which is operated by the Kentucky Historical Society. The Greek Revival architecture is appealing. On the lawn, there is a monument to William Goble. He won a race to become the state's governor in 1899. On the way to his inauguration, though, he fell after being struck in the chest by an assassin's bullet. He was sworn in, but died of his injuries 4 days after being shot. His final words were reportedly, quote, "Tell my friends to be brave, fearless, and loyal to the common people." Pretty good final words, if you ask me. On a bluff overlooking the Kentucky River and downtown is the historic Frankfurt Cemetery. There are all sorts of noted individuals buried in this location. The most famous is frontiersman Daniel Boone. He was known for his exploration of Kentucky and for creating the Wilderness Road into the state from the east. Some say he was one of the earliest American folk heroes. He died in 1820 in Missouri. The remains of Daniel and his wife Rebecca were reportedly exhumed and moved to this spot in 1845. Some in Missouri claim they are still buried there. Much more history can be found here. This is the Capital City Museum. Well over 200 years of the past is documented in this location. There is everything from the founding of Frankfurt to displays about bourbon and even a rich tradition of fishing reel creation. Exhibits cover 2 floors and several different exhibit rooms. It is worth walking through for at least a few moments. Admission is free. History and nature converge on high ground near downtown. This is called Fort Hill. It is a site which commemorates Civil War activity that took place in the area. There is not a great deal that remains from that time, but there are a few remnants. The hill was home to a couple of earthwork forts. They were built in an attempt to protect the state government, which sided with the Union, from an advancing Confederate army. Eventually, rebel forces took control of Frankfurt for a short time. The Sullivan House, which was built in the early 1800s, serves as the visitor center here. This park can be a good place to enjoy being outside and get a feel for some of the region's history at the same time. Downtown has some of the most amazing old homes. The most famous is Liberty Hall. This house was built in the Federal style of architecture, made from bricks that were created of clay pulled from its own cellar. It was completed in 1800. Along with the Orlando Brown House, which is situated next door, this is now a museum and historic site. The garden area between and behind the structures is free to walk through. Just walking the streets in this part of the city is pretty incredible. House after house in some blocks has a story, with most dating to the 19th century and each serving as the former home of some of Frankfurt's most recognizable early residents. They are some of the most attractive you will find anywhere, and there is a high concentration of them. Wapping is one of the streets that has a large number of those houses. It is also home to the Paul Sawyer Library. This is a key gathering spot for residents. Along with plenty of books and media, the library features art. That includes some paintings from its namesake, who is well known for creating images of the city. Frankfurt has a waterfront. The Kentucky River flows through the heart of the city. Beginning in the eastern part of the state, the river flows generally northwest until it empties into the Ohio River. It is possible to have some very scenic views of the waterway as it winds through the town. Downtown, there are two bridges that connect the two sides. The most interesting one is the Singing Bridge. It is called that because of this sound. That hum is created as tires cross the open great steel deck. With several thousand vehicles traversing the span each day, the song is almost constant. The bridge was built in 1893, and this sort of deck was placed down in the 1930s. A few miles out of town is this section of Elkhorn Creek. It is a popular place for recreation, including canoeing and kayaking. Trips can be taken through Canoe Kentucky. That company provides the equipment and shuttles customers to the appropriate spots to make the experience as friendly as possible. The creek is gorgeous. Over the North Elkhorn Creek is one of the only existing covered bridges in the area. This is the Switzer Bridge. Originally built around 1855, it is 120 feet long and 11 feet wide. Years ago, I was disturbed by the amount of graffiti on the inside, but that was a losing fight. Now, that is just part of the package. Take a look at this place. Cove Spring Park is my favorite natural area near Frankfurt. It covers a total of 240 acres. There are 3 sections of the park. This is the lower Cove portion. On this early morning, a bit of fog softened the landscape, giving a totally relaxing feel to the place. In some spots, water moves quickly, while in others, it meanders. The bluffs rise high, and in one location, water tumbles from the top. Trails wind through all 3 sections of Cove Spring. A short distance out of town is the Josephine Sculpture Park. This is an outdoor gallery that covers quite a bit of ground. Art and nature are commingled, making for an extremely special experience. There are said to be close to 70 different sculptures, with some of them permanently in place and others taking up space on a temporary basis. I would give it at least an hour if you choose to go. There is no charge to enter, and the park is open every day. This part of Kentucky is acclaimed for its bourbon, and that liquor is a main ingredient in one of the most popular candies around. Rebecca Ruth is the original home of the Bourbon Ball. The center contains the distinct flavor of bourbon and is surrounded by chocolate. A pecan hat rides on top. It is an amazing couple of bites. The factory is located here in downtown, and tours are available. Started by Ruth Boo over 100 years ago, the 4th generation is now in charge of the family business. There are now many really unique shops located in downtown Frankfurt. They are located along several streets through the grid, mainly to the north of the river. St. Clair Street has always had an interesting mix of places to shop, eat, and drink. In recent years, a lot of new establishments have opened there. It's always worth walking this main block to experience the places that you haven't seen before. An operational train track runs down the center of Broadway. There are some new businesses here too, but there is one section of the street where the stores are well established. It's always been one of my favorite parts of downtown, with a coffee shop and a bookstore being a couple of the main components. This is also where you'll find Completely Kentucky. Artists and makers from all across the Commonwealth are represented here. When I stopped in, they said they now have over 600 people who have items for sale in here. Nothing comes from outside of Kentucky. If visiting from elsewhere, this would be the perfect stop for getting a souvenir of your time in the state. On Main Street is the newest coffee shop in the city. This is Engine House Coffee. The name has meaning. This is an example of how Frankfurt has been developing lately. This has only been here about a year. It's built in an old fire station, and it's a really cool spot. And it's joining a number of other really cool restaurants, cafes, and shops that have popped up since I was here last. I enjoyed the atmosphere immensely. Typically in the US, I just get a drip coffee and dress it up with sweetener and cream. Here though, I held on to my overseas order of a cappuccino. It was tasty, and I liked seeing the reminders of what this place once was. It's not even about the food so much for me at Cliffside Diner, but instead the look and feel of the little restaurant. I stopped in shortly before noon on a Sunday and watched the grill as my fried bologna sandwich took shape. I have such great memories of this place. It has been here for as long as I can remember. And this sandwich, this is world class. Thick cut bologna, and it's got pickles and onions and lettuce and tomato and mayonnaise. It is absolutely incredible. I don't really remember ever having a sandwich or meal here that was as good as the fried bologna. It truly was exceptional. That just made my visit to Cliffside better than I thought it would be. Stop in for a bite to experience a heavy dose of nostalgia. From one of the restaurants that has been around the longest to one of the newest. This is Big Daddy's Fried Chicken. Even though it's fresh on the scene, I had heard good things. This is part of that new wave that I've been talking about here in Frankfurt. The place has only been open a couple of weeks. They haven't even had their official grand opening as I'm sitting here. I'm just having the nuggets, but if this is any indication, you've got to come here for some fried chicken. I am going to have to stop by someday and try the fried chicken. I was thrilled with the nuggets and the setting, and talking briefly with the owner was also a treat. There has been a restaurant at this location since I was a kid. The place to go on Main Street for ice cream is Hoggies. When I walked in, the parlor was serving up treats as quickly as they could dip them. My choice of a scoop of white chocolate raspberry was about as good as ice cream gets. If that's not for you, they've got about 20 other flavors. In recent years, Frankfurt has joined the craft beer scene. For a special brew pub treat, head outside of town to West 6th Farm. The beer is just part of the fun at this location. There are all sorts of activities that enhance the visit. There are all sorts of things to do when you come out to the farm. Everything from hiking to disc golf to cutting your own sunflowers. The time is limited though that you can do all that. This place is open only Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. When I visited, there were 6 or 7 beers on tap. I have been to the main brewery, which is located about 30 miles away in Lexington. The farm gave much more to do while offering many of the same beers on tap. Sig Lusher Brewery has a fantastic story to go along with the beer it serves. The operation started in Frankfurt in 1866, which makes it one of the oldest breweries in the nation. There was a 127-year hiatus, however, between when Sig Lusher died and when the business was revived in 2018. The great-great-great-grandson of the founder was involved in bringing it back to life. Beer here has a solid taste, it's cold, and the history is unbeatable. What do you think? I remember saying years ago that someday Frankfurt is going to be a very special place to visit. It's getting to that level now, and I can't wait to see what this place is like in another 5 to 10 years. I'll have a couple more stops here in the States before I get back to traveling to other countries. Next up for me is Europe. In the meantime, I hope you enjoy the places that I'll visit here. I will try to make it as interesting as possible. See you soon.